Have you ever wondered how business organizations came about many, many years ago? My name is James, and we're going to talk about this today. I'm here in London where we see the earliest forms of business organizations coming together, and the first ones were corporations. You see business people coming together in order to do shipping way back several hundred years ago, bringing spices from different foreign lands. And business people wanted to be able to joint venture in these shipments, profit from them as well, and maybe have limited liability, at least for the shipments themselves. But in order to get all of that protected, to have that protection and get that corporate charter, you needed an act of parliament. And those were very difficult to obtain, and of course to get those charters. And all through this time, we see the legal system that's evolving. Years ago, back in the earlier English times, we see feudal law where the king owned everything. They owned all the land, and private property rights were pretty much non-existent. But then as a result of the evolution of the Battle of Hastings and also the Magna Carta, we see common law being part of the system where you could have individual property rights. But there was a problem with the common law in that the rights of beneficiaries, the rights of lenders, were not part of the system. So this evolution included what became known as the courts of equity, the court of equitable rights. People that don't legally have title to the land but do have rights. And so part of all this included the trust instrument. This is where it all came about. And we see the trust being used for three primary purposes. One is for family settlements, because if you didn't have the trust, the property in the family, typically it was land at that point, would pass to the heirs. That's how the system worked. It remained what they call family settlements. The second way it was used was in charitable trusts. Charitable trusts were the church. Okay, so you tithe and you give money to the church. They take care of the church and it continues the building for the benefit of the members. Okay, so those were charitable trusts. And the third one were business people that realized that getting this act of parliament was incredibly difficult, and so they used the trust instrument in order to conduct commerce or do business. And they were called unincorporated joint stock companies. And here we are today at the London Stock Exchange, the location of the original London Stock Exchange, where you saw these unincorporated joint stock companies originally organized. We also have trade unions, we have utility companies. The original Lloyd's of London Insurance Exchange was also one of these business trusts. Now, after that, what we saw with the United States and the original 13 colonies and the evolution of the United States is that the original 13 colonies adopted the English legal system, the common law, and then of course the rights of equitable owners or equitable shareholders. So the individual 13 colonies, they were the ones that were responsible for issuing these corporate charters. The legislature had to approve them. And they were sort of cumbersome, and they also had a lot of the work that was involved in them, kind of like the Act of Parliament was. And so over time, the individual colonies, they were busy trying to set up their government organizations, their local government, and so doing these corporate charters was kind of a pain. So at one point they were thinking of shifting all that obligations and all those responsibilities to the federal government, but it didn't actually happen. So it came back. And then over time we saw in the turn of the century, in the late 1890s or so, the state of New Jersey started to open up their rules and regulations for corporate charters. They wanted to attract more business to the state of New Jersey. Delaware followed. And then, of course, over the ensuing years, you see many other states, they're jumping on the bandwagon in order to attract capital, offering different types of benefits, maybe privacy, maybe lower fees, different types of protections, and so on. And that's where you see the evolution of the corporation in the United States become incredibly popular. And they're huge revenue streams for the individual states and all the people that support that particular ecosystem. Later on, you saw the LLCs come in, which was basically a corporation with different types of income tax classifications. So what I wanted to share with you today, along with this history, is to show you that these business trusts, these unincorporated joint stock companies, are still part of our system in the United States, also in England, and many other countries. But they're just not used that much because what you hear mostly about are corporations and LLCs. But if you'd like to use one of these unincorporated joint stock companies in the United States, you still can. And the benefits of them are that you don't have any of this government involvement with you. There's no permission required from the Secretary of State in order to operate one of them. And best of all, especially with the internet age that we're living in now, is if you do them right, they're private. They're not even listed on the internet. The internet's the big thing. That's what I wanted to make a point about. Is it the corporations and the LLCs? You can find all of them, of course, online, but the business trusts are not. So that's kind of a short history of business organizations over the last several hundred years, and I hope you enjoyed this, and we'll talk to you soon. All right.